Hello dear friends, welcome to Gate Academy Global. So before starting today's session, I would like to have the input as well as concurrence regarding the quality of audio as well as video. If it is perfect, just write perfect over the live chat and then we are ready to go ahead. Anyways, the agenda behind today's video, we are going to take around 5 to 6 number of numericals based on the concept of the polar plot. And probably the session which we are going to have today would not last more than 45 minutes. We are going to have a small session in today's class. Let me focus over the first question first, then we'll take the second, third, fourth. It would be like just a practice question, or it would be just like a brushing question to the concept which we have studied in the last class. Yes. Anyways, keeping aside each and everything, focus over the first question first. First question first. This problem had been experienced by the instrumentation people in year of 2004. The problem was framed by IIT Delhi. Read the problem carefully. The problem says the figure shows the polar plot of the system. The transfer function of the system is. The four different options are being given. Option A is been 5 within the bracket 1 plus 0.1 into of s. Option B had been 1 plus 0.5 times of s. Option C is been 5 getting multiplied with 1 plus of 10s, and D had been 5 within the bracket 1 plus of s. 1 plus of s. Tell me what would be the best most answer for this given problem. What would be the best most answer for this given problem? Let me do one thing, let me bring this problem towards working board and we would try to smash the problem there itself. This has been the first question of the day. This has been the first question of the day. Read it carefully and tell me what would be its best most answer. Read it carefully and tell me what would be its best most answer. So maximum it should take 1 minute, and within that 1 minute you must be able to solve this problem clearly. See what the problem states. In problem they had been talking about the polar plot, and as you know the polar plot starts from 0 plus and goes till infinity plus, and it had been clearly written omega is equals to 0 had been at this point, and similarly as the omega had been increasing it might have gone to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. At omega is equals to 10 somewhere here the polar plot, or I can say the magnitude as well as the phase offered by the given g j omega h j omega prevalents, and as the value of omega is been keep increasing, you yourself would be able to understand the magnitude was keep increasing, and end of the day it goes towards infinity. Tell me what would be the best most answer over there. What would be the best most answer over there? What would be the best most answer over there? I would like to have the input from each one of you. Anyways, let me crack this problem out. Here goes the solution. See, one thing has been quite sure. At omega is equals to 0, the phase which has been provided by the system is being 0 degree. Why? Because this has been the 0 degree line, or I can say it had been the real axis of the S plane, and similarly it had been the imaginary axis of the S plane. So it had been 0 degree and it had been constant 90 degree line. So may I know out of the 4 different options which we had, which would provide the angle as 0 degree at omega is equals to 0 everywhere, anything. Either you take the reference of this at omega is equals to 0, the s would become 0, it would be pure real in nature. Similarly it would be 1, it would be 5, it would be 5. So what I am saying, you need not to bring s as j omega and you had to bring as magnitude. Simply what you could have done, at omega is equals to 0, the s would be 0 and s becomes 0. Definitely this factor becomes 5, this factor becomes 1, this factor becomes 5, and this factor becomes 5. So put together at omega is equals to 0 is being concerned where the magnitude had been 5. One thing is pretty sure, one thing is pretty clear. What had been the magnitude had been 5. So may I know out of the 4 different options, which options has been ruled out? Obviously sir, the option B is being ruled out. Option B could have been the answer only and only at omega is equals to 0. The magnitude which was offered by the system must have been 1. So obviously B had been ruled out. That's the first thing. Similarly at omega is equals to 10, it had been categorically said that the angle offered by the system is being 45 degree. Obviously this is 0, this is 90. So if I'll take angle bisector, in between you would be having 45 degree, and precisely this point I do not worry about its magnitude, but precisely at this point what had happened, the angle has been 45 degree. So may I know at omega is equals to 10 where you are getting the angle as 45 degree. See, if you will try to calculate its angle offered by this system, that would simply be 10 inverse of imaginary part. The imaginary part had been j omega 0.1, or I simply call it 0.1 of omega, and towards denominator side it's simply gonna be 1. Simply gonna be 1. Here the angle offered by the system is simply gonna be 10 inverse of its imaginary part that had been 0.5 times of omega, and here it's gonna be 10 inverse of 10 times of omega, and similarly here it's gonna be 10 inverse of omega. May I know when I would feed omega is equals to 10, where I would be finding the angle is 45 degree. What does that mean by the angle is 45 degree? The ratio of this factor must be 1. This factor must be 1. If I take the reference of this, it becomes 10 inverse 0.5 into of omega, where the omega had been 10, so it had been 5. Definitely the angle would not be 45. Here also the angle would not be 45. Here also angle would not be 45. But when you would feed the omega as 10, 0.1 and 10 would get multiplied, would result 1. And if we'll take the inverse of 1 put together, the result which we are going to get here is simply going to be 45 degree. So may I know, out of the 4 different options which are attached along with this problem, which is supposed to be the correct answer? Obviously A is supposed to be the correct answer. A is supposed to be the correct answer. But what I see or what I feel, it had been a wrong design problem from the gate, because I have checked out, the problem had been very same, but according to me this has been the wrong problem designed by the gate. Anybody would be able to say why it had been the wrong problem which had been designed by the gate? Anyone? Anyone? How it had been wrong design problem? How it had been wrong design problem? How it had been wrong design problem? If you guys are having any sort of input, sir, the way the problem could have been framed, then it could have been a better problem. So that input I would like to have from each one of you. Why it had been a wrong design problem? Why it had been a wrong design problem? You guys are having any sort of input, then you can put it over the live chat. According to me, it had been a wrong design, exactly not wrong, but still the problem could have been designed in a better way. See how? My dear friend, one thing has been quite sure. Once you talk about the magnitude offered by either of the transfer function, the component of omega had been coming towards numerator. No, not like. What I am saying, either you take reference of either of the options which had been supplied with the problem, the component of the omega had been coming towards upside as far as its magnitude is being concerned. If you take the magnitude of this factor is simply going to be 5, could have been taken as common. It would have been 1 plus of 0.1 omega, which would be raised to the power of 2. And as the value of omega would increase, what would happen? The magnitude would increase. And as the magnitude would increase, the radial distance from the origin has to get increased. Whereas if you talk about this polar plot now, as the omega is increasing, the radial distance is keep decreasing, and from here onwards you can say the distance had been increasing. Obviously it would not be the case. As the omega is increasing, magnitude is increasing. As the magnitude is increasing, the radial distance from the origin has to increase. There is no other way. And you can see at least till this particular point, the radial distance from the omega was keep decreasing. That's what I am saying. The best most answer or the best most figure could have been like this. Figure could have been like this. Are you agreeing or not? Are you agreeing it or not? So obviously now you can see what had been happening. As the value of omega is been increasing, the radial distance is being keep increasing. Like here radial distance was less, here it had been increased, here further it had been improved, and it had been keep improving. That's the first thing. And yes, end of the day, it would be straight line, or I can say it would be almost parallel to the v-axis, and end of the day, if we'll have the look angle would be almost 90 degree. So I would like to have the input from each one of you. Do you think the way the problem had been designed, is it been the best problem, or still few refinement could have been done over the problem? According to me, as far as the control system I know, definitely this could have been the best most answer. But still what they did, they just wanted to show at omega is equals to 0, the magnitude had been 5, the phase offered by the system was 0, and similarly at omega tends to infinity, magnitude was tending towards infinity, and the phase which would be offered by the system would be 90 degree. But the best most polar plot which we could have got it must have been this, So DS says yes sir, agree. Amit says yes sir, agree. Anyone else who had been agreeing over the concept which we have just dealt now? 9 number of people had been seeing this. So according to me, this could have been the better problem, or the plot which they have given as a polar plot, they could have refined it. Amit? Yes, sir. DS? Yes, sir. Agree. Yes, sir. So that's what I am saying here. There are many questions I can see over the control system analog where the mistake had been done, even from the gate also. Even from the gate also. See, the method of challenge probably had been introduced 4 to 5 years back, where they ask what are the different problems where you find a certain mistake had been done over the problem, certain mistake had been given over the answer key, and they used to correct it. But before 5 years or 5 years back, there were no mechanism to take any input from the student, and there I can say at least one or two problem used to be wrong. Now also, if you have one or two questions wrong in each and individual papers, so definitely 5 years back also there must have been few number of questions which would have been wrong. And how many years we had the gate? Probably 30 years, more than 30 years, we had the continuous gate examination. So only we had the method of challenge for the 5 to 6 years, but rest 25 years or 25, 4 years, we did not have any mechanism of challenge and all. So obviously there could have few number of mistakes which had been keep repeated here and there in different PYQs. So what I am saying, you had to be smart enough. You had to put so much effort on your studies such that even you would be able to segregate. So this segment of the problem had been a mistake even in gate also. Even in gate also. And even not only AR, if you take the reference of B, C and D everywhere, no, as the magnitude will increase, omega would increase, the magnitude will increase, and obviously the radial distance has to keep increase, This has not been the correct most answer, but still what I am saying, this, if this would have been the problem from EAC, it looks good, but this has been the problem from gate. We don't expect this thing from gate specifically. More than 2 to 3 lakhs number of students had been aiming from the electrical, electronics and instrumentation, and such a blunder, if the teacher is doing such a blunder, the professor has been doing, how many number of questions they might be getting? If a professor is been managing, or the professor is managing the questions from the control system, how many questions he has to prepare? Only 4 to 5 number of question he has to prepare. But still this sort of silly mistake if somebody is doing, no, this is not good. This is not good. But this happens, you have to accept it. You have to accept it. Yes, sir, learn enough to self-correct. That's what I am saying. DS, perfect proverb I can say. Yes, sir, learn enough to self-correct. Because I have seen many of the students, what they would do, they would create something new. A new dish they would create. Sir, if we have this sort of transfer function, we used to have this sort of curve. No, my dear friend, you just had to connect your concept through the basic. You did not had to deteriorate your basic at all, at any cost. If something is not getting connected to the basics, no, I am sure about it. If the problem is asked from that particular topic, no, you would not be able to answer it perfectly. Agreed, though? Okay then, in the same sequence, I think it's the right time to move forward. So, all of us say yes, once all of them are agreeing that the answer had been A, and at the same time, the best most polar plot must have been in this way. So, what I am saying, you had a parabola, no? Rather having interior parabola, it must have been an exterior parabola. That's it. That would have been the answer. In the same sequence, let me move forward. And let me take the next question. Yeah. Let me take the next question which comes in front of you. This problem had been experienced by the engineering services people. The problem had been experienced by the electronics. Let me do one thing. Let me bring this problem towards working board, and we would try to smash that problem there itself. Which of the following is the Nyquist diagram of the open loop transfer function? First of all, it's not a Nyquist plot. It had been a polar plot, and that's what I used to say. In EAC, few of the assumptions you had to cook by yourself. Although there has not been any basis at all. It had not been a Nyquist plot, it had been a polar plot only, because it had not been a closed contour. So may I know which would be the answer? My dear friend, one thing has been quite sure, we have been dealing with the type 1 system. What does that mean by the type 1 system? Once you will calculate the angle offered by the each and individual term, no, at omega is equals to 0. At omega is equals to 0, this becomes pure real. At omega is 0, it becomes pure real. That means the angle which would be introduced by this factor and this factor is simply going to be 0 at omega is equals to 0. Yes, sir, we are agreeing on it. But the S is being the single factor which would have the impact of minus 90 degree everywhere, including omega is equals to 0, intermediate values of omega, and even higher most frequency of omega. If you want to know, you yourself would be able to know that. See, what does that mean by the 1 upon S? 1 upon S, if the S is being replaced with j omega, it had been 1 upon j omega. If iota had been brought towards upside, or the iota had got multiplication towards numerator as well as denominator, factor which would be left out is simply going to be minus j divided by omega. If we talk about the location of minus j divided by omega, one thing has been quite sure. As there has been no real part, neither it would go towards left hand side, neither it would go towards right hand side. Precisely it has to be over the omega, over the j omega axis, or over the imaginary axis. Keep in mind, if the omega is strictly made positive, one thing is being quite sure, it would always be over negative imaginary axis. Either you take omega is equals to 0 plus, maybe 1, maybe 2. If you will take 0 plus, where it would be? It would be somewhere at infinity. Obviously minus. Once you will take omega is equals to 1, it would be somewhere at minus of j. Once you will take omega is equals to 2, somewhere it would be at minus j by 2. Minus j by 2. But one thing has been quite sure, because of the presence of 1 upon s, the angle which would be maintained from the positive real axis would always be 90 degree clockwise, and hence it's gonna be minus of 90 degree, and hence it's gonna be minus of 90 degree. Could you understand what I'm saying? But this factor would not introduce any of the angle, this factor would not introduce any of the angle. So what I say, whenever you have this sort of problem, no, straight away one thing should come in your mind. At omega is equals to 0, rather putting omega is equals to 0, you just feed s is equals to 0. Once you feed s is equals to 0, this becomes 1, this becomes 1, this becomes 0, and 5 divided by 0 is going to be infinity. Infinity, what does it mean by the infinity? The magnitude had become infinity. What is meaning of the magnitude to be infinity? The radial distance of that point from the origin is going to be a very huge, very large. It could have been somewhere here, it could have been somewhere here, it could have been somewhere here, it could have been somewhere here. But the distance is being made very large. So now you also had to locate from where the magnitude had been very large. It could have been oriented towards minus 90, could have been minus 180, could have been minus 270, could have been 0. Anyways, how will I know about it? The magnitude part is simply going to be infinity, and if we'll talk about the phase part, it's been simply minus of 90 degree. So we had to take the reference of minus 90 degree. What I'm saying, we had to take the reference of minus 90 degree, and the magnitude has to be infinity. But again the next problem, should it be almost sticking to minus 90? No, not necessary. If it has been like this also, no, if it has been like this also, if it has been starting from a very, very large distance, still the angle is 90 degree. It is just a representation that we use to stick the given polar plot taking the reference of minus 90 degree, but this is not the case always. Still, whatever is being given, we would accept as it is. Yes, sir. Somewhere it would be taking the reference of minus 90 degree. So, okay, sir, it would start taking the reference of minus 90 degree. It would start taking the reference of minus 90 degree. Yeah, minus 90 degree. And as the value of omega has been increasing, one thing has been quite sure, all of the factor of the omega is been prevalent towards denominator side only. As the value of omega would increase, the denominator would become more and more heavier, and as the denominator is becoming more and more heavier, definitely the complete worth of this magnitude has to shrink. And as it's been having, you yourself would be able to understand, it has been keep decreasing. And one thing might be, see. Here it looks the magnitude is being increased. No, it has to decrease its magnitude. That means it has to come nearby. So one thing has been quite sure, it has to start with a minus 90 degree, magnitude has to be infinity. And similarly at omega is equals to infinity, what would happen? Denominator would become infinity. Either take the reference of this, or this. And as the denominator becomes infinity, the magnitude is simply going to be 0. And even 0, what does it mean by the 0? That means the radial distance from the origin is almost null. But will you take the reference of which angle? Here the angle reference which has to be taken is how much? It would introduce minus 90, and the angle which had been introduced by this factor is going to be tan inverse of 0.0 times of omega. Omega had been tends to infinity. There, this would introduce another minus 90. This would also introduce another minus 90, and it would land up to the minus 270. So put together, this has been omega is equals to 0, where the magnitude had been infinity, angle had been minus 90, and as the omega was increasing, what had happened? Yes, this has been the answer. Sir, when if we add 0 transfer to the transfer function, 0 transfer, I could not exactly understood what you wants to say over here. Agreed now? So till this point, probably each and everything must be clear to all of us. Each and everything must be clear to all of us. Let me take the next question. Let me take the next question. 1 upon s into s plus 1. How the curve would look like? How the curve would look like? Obviously, the people would say, sir, curve would look something like this. We are going to have a polar plot over here. It had got its imaginary axis. It had got its real axis. Yes, we can call it 0 degree line. We can call it minus 90 degree line. We can call it minus 180 degree line. And let's take its being minus 270 degree line. Minus 270 degree line. Yes, and if we'll talk about the initial magnitude or the magnitude at omega is equals to 0, obviously because of a loose pole at origin, when we would feed omega is equals to 0, see, when I am feeding omega is equals to 0, this factor is still live, it's been 1, but this factor had become 0. So whenever you have one or more than one type system, what happens, the magnitude at omega is equals to 0 would always be infinity. Could you understand? When the magnitude would become infinity, there is only one way through which the magnitude could become infinity, and that has been the what? Loose presence of the pole at origin. Because once you will feed this factor as 0, nothing is being added, and nothing is being added, magnitude will become infinity. Yes. See, so it has to start, if we'll talk about omega is equals to 0, and let's take the another reference, omega is equals to infinity. At omega is equals to 0, see what I am saying, you have to save the time in gate examinations also. So most of the calculations would run your brain. See what happens whenever the pen and copy contact increases, no, you takes more time and even the accuracy also goes down. Your supercomputer must be used properly. See, at omega is equals to 0, sir, namaste, omega 0, put together the magnitude which would be provided by the system is simply mean infinity. What does that mean by the infinity? That means at omega is equals to 0, your magnitude would be infinity, and as the magnitude is been infinity, the distance from the origin is simply going to be very large, utterly large it had to be. Similarly, once we feed omega is equals to 0, angle, how much angle is going to introduce, my dear friend? Because of this, the factor of angle is going to be simply tan inverse of omega. Omega would be kept as 0, and you can expect this sort of factor is not going to introduce any sort of angle in future. So what I am saying, if you have s plus 1, s plus 2 towards numerator, maybe towards denominator, if you have this sort of factor, no, if you have this sort of factor, forget about any angle they are going to introduce, they are going to include at omega is equals to 0, because they themselves is going to be 0. But if instead the plus somewhere minus is being used, no, even they can introduce the angle at omega is equals to 0 also. Could you understand what I am saying? Because I have seen many of the times the students say, sir, at omega is equals to 0, they are not going to introduce any angle, but instead the plus and plus, if somewhere the minus is being attached, no, they are going to introduce the angle even at omega is equals to 0 also, depending on the different situation. Depending on the different situation. So should I start? Yes, sir, angle had been minus 90 and the magnitude had been infinity, and at omega is equals to infinity, now denominator, either you take this, becomes infinity. If the denominator is too large, magnitude will become simply 0. And similarly, if we'll talk about angle at omega is equals to infinity, this would also introduce the angle of minus 90, and it has always been minus 90, put together it's been minus of 180. See, theoretically speaking, we draw the plot like this. And in this plot, at least two things had been ensured. At omega is equals to 0, at omega is equals to 0, hypothetically, I presume the distance from the origin had been very large, infinity, magnitude had been infinity. And as the omega had been increasing, you yourself would be able to understand the radial distance had been keep decreasing. Many of the times what the student do, I have seen that, they would draw like this, which had been the worst thing to draw. What they would do, and there they would do like this. No, my dear friend, This is not the correct way. See, here distance was lesser, but here you have been keep increasing the distance. That means your magnitude was increasing. This is the wrong way to represent the thing. This is the wrong way to represent the thing. Could you understand what I am saying? One thing has been quite sure, over the increment of omega, the distance must be keep decreasing, Like Kachua Agarbatti you see, yes, mosquito coil we used to have, no, mosquito coil had a specific structure. As we go in the direction, definitely the distance from the middle point, it's keep decreasing, it's been keep decreasing. So again I am saying this has been the wrong notation which we use. I have seen many of the students used to do that. No, that is not correct. That is not correct. That's the first thing. That's the first thing. Agreed? No? Is that part clear to all of us? May I know? Yeah, spiral, spiral. But this is not the exact spiral. No, that is what I am saying. This is not the exact spiral. The spiral Nyquist plot you will be having, or spiral polar plot you will be having only and only if you have the factor of e to the power of s. Maybe plus or maybe minus. Maybe plus or maybe minus. Is it the best way to represent the thing? Still, it is not the best way to represent the thing. What I am saying, we had got a little bit ambiguity. Now, many of the students would say, sir, what? If the curve would have been like this also, no, then also I can say at omega is equals to 0, the magnitude was infinity, and similarly, the phase was minus 90. How? See, if it has been coming down from very bottom now, still the angle is simply equals to of minus 90. And similarly, over the value of omega, the magnitude is being keep decreasing. So exactly I do not know how this curve had been started from omega is equals to 0. How this curve had been started at omega is equals to 0. So what should I do now? What should I do now? Now what we are going to do? We are going to have a little bit analysis over this OLTF. The OLTF has been 1 divided by of s plus 1, s plus 1. Agreeing on it? Let me do one thing, shift this OLTF into the frequency domain. So j omega, j omega, j omega, j omega getting multiplied with j omega would become minus of omega square. And here it becomes j omega. Here it becomes j omega. Yes sir, agreeing or? Yeah, minus of omega square plus of j omega. Let me do its rationalization. Yes, the rationalization is being made over here. Rationalization is being made over here. And once we'll do the rationalization of it, it simply becomes minus of omega square, or put together this omega square. No, just try to understand this. This minus times of omega square is in place of a, and similarly j omega is being in the place of b. And as we know, a plus b into a minus b has been the identity which we have been using since childhood, and that had been a square minus of b square. So let me feed those data. So here it had been minus of omega square going to raised by the factor of 2, and here it becomes minus j square omega square. J square would become plus, and here it becomes omega square. Omega square. Yes, no? It becomes omega square. Any mistake we have been doing? Probably no. Nothing. Nothing. So it had been, yeah, that has been fine. And towards numerator side, we are going to have minus of omega square minus of j omega, minus of j omega. Could you understand? Could you really understood what exactly I wanted to say over here? Now tell me, at omega is equals to 0, what would be its real part and what would be its imaginary part? That had been an important point to be studied now, and that is very important. What I am saying, that had been very important. Now you can segregate its real part as well as its imaginary part. The real part had been minus of omega square, and here it becomes omega which has been raised to the power of 4, and here it had been omega square. Yes, no? And similarly, if we'll talk about its imaginary part, the imaginary part had been minus j omega had been brought omega to the power of 4 plus of omega square. Omega square. Yes. We had to feed omega tends to 0. We had to feed omega tends to 0. And once we'll feed omega tends to 0, this has been the case of 0 by 0. 0 by 0. Obviously, we had to use the What? L hospital rule. We had to use the L hospital rule, or you could have taken omega square common over here. So omega square would have been taken common. So the factor which would have been left out is being simply minus 1 divided by omega square plus of 1. And now if I'll feed omega is equals to 0, the real part had been minus 1. The real part had been minus 1. And even here, if you'll bring omega out, no, what's the factor you had been left out with? It's gonna be omega 3 plus of omega, and if I'll feed omega is equals to 0, this factor becomes infinity. Yes, no? So what's the conclusion you can bring out of it? What's the conclusion you can bring out of it? That means if you really wants to draw the polar plot into the best most format, at least you could know at omega is equals to 0, the real part had been minus 1, and similarly the imaginary part had been infinity. That means if you really wants to draw this curve very perfect, no, you could have taken this in this way. The real part is been minus 1, and as the omega starts from 0, no, almost your polar plot would become tangent on minus 1 line, and this would be the best way to represent the polar plot for the given transfer function. See, the three different pattern had been made. That had been this as a first pattern, this has been the second pattern, and this has been the third pattern. May I know which would be the best most pattern? This had been taken as first pattern, second pattern, and this has been the third pattern. In all of three, almost the things are same, but yes, which would be the best most pattern? Tell me which one is gonna be the best most pattern. So Subham Sripal says the third one. Anyone else apart from Subham? Anyone else apart from third? Yes, no? Third is gonna be the best most method, and many of the times I have seen, specifically in instrumentation, rather drawing the polar plot in this format, they used to plot in this format. And student, what they do, they used to read is usually Manke, B Manke and all. There most of the time their plot looks something like this. So what they would think, sir, no sir, this can't be the answer. Whereas once they will go into the detailed mathematical analysis, they would know at omega is equals to 0, the real part of the given OLTF had, real part is minus 1 and imaginary part was infinity. That means imaginarily it would go towards very downside, but there it would be what? Tangent over the real part as minus 1. Agreed, no? Minus 1. Because the distance is being maintained infinity by default. See, if it starts from here also, no, here also, then also you can say the magnitude is been infinity, and also you can say the angle had been minus 90. Why? Because if you will take a small angle minus 90, no, then also it would get connected till this. So what I would say, if the third option is being given in this problem, no, always select the third option first. Now, according to me, if third option is not being given, no, you choose the first option. And according to me, even in few times I have seen in EAC, even the second option is also being given. So you would have the third as a first choice, then second priority should go to the first, and similarly third priority should go to the second. Agreed, no? Okay, then let me move forward. Tell me what would be the best most answer for this given problem. Because as I have communicated at very beginning, I won't take very large session. We would keep today's session very small. Focus over the next question. Which one of the following polar plot corresponds to? The four different options were attached. The problem had been experienced by the electronics people in engineering services examination year of 2007. Again, see 1 upon s square, because of 1 upon s square, how much angle gets introduced here? See, just try to understand in this. 1 upon s square, the s could have been written as j omega, has been raised to the power of 2. Once you will be raising it to the 2, the resultant what we are having is gonna be 1 divided by minus of omega square. Anyways, omega would be always positive. If you keep omega as negative also, no, or negative real value, then also it would always be negative real value. May I know where the negative real get placed? Negative real value would always be placed over the left hand side of the real axis, and once we'll evaluate how much angle it takes from the positive real axis, either it can be taken as plus 180 or either it could be taken as minus 180. So I have seen many of the times the student just by heart, whenever 1 upon s minus 90 1 upon s square minus 180, you should have a little bit basics behind that, no? You should have a little bit basics behind it. So obviously the starting angle is gonna be minus of 180 because of type 2 system. Is starting magnitude is gonna be infinity. So may I know where it has to be start? It has to be start over here, and what's gonna be its final angle? The final angle is gonna be this and this. Yes, C is gonna be the best most answer. Agreed? No? So okay, we will stop our session here itself. We will stop our session here itself, and the student who had been preparing for the ESE, they can see our complete solution which had been given over the YouTube, and we would meet tomorrow with the same agenda. The topic exactly I won't be able to say, but yes, we would take few more number of problem over the concept of Nyquist plot, and then we would bind up. And if you guys are having any sort of input, no sir, this topic we can take in great detail, I would take that also. Okay then. So this is all for the today's session. We would meet in tomorrow's session, and we are going to spend good amount of 1 hour. Till then, bye bye, take care.